Today's lesson is about adding and subtracting fractions. We're going to add fractions with common denominators or like denominators, and we're also going to learn how to add and subtract fractions when you're given unlike denominators. Let's get started. Here's the first example problem. And what you'll notice is the denominators are common here. They're the same. They're both 6. When you add or subtract fractions, we're going to show you that you need to have a common denominator. The visuals or the representation show an example of why you need that. You can add blocks like this when you have the same number of them and they're the same size. So here we have 1 out of 6 colored in to represent the first fraction. We have 2 out of 6 colored in to represent the second fraction. So we can just count up the blue blocks, and that'll tell us how many out of 6 we're going to color in for our answer. So 1 plus 2 is 3, so we're going to color in 3. And what you'll notice is that the representation also shows you why you don't add denominators. When you add 1 out of 6 plus 2 out of 6, you're just combining the blue blocks, but you're not totaling up all of the total blocks. You're just keeping the answer at 6, or keeping the total at 6. So if someone has 1 out of 6 and someone else has 2 out of 6, when they put them together, they have 3 out of 6. So the example here shows 3 out of 6. We're going to ask you to simplify your fractions. So here, 3 out of 6, 3 and 6 both have a common factor of 3. So you can divide those by 3 to make your simplified answer 1/2. Okay? Now let's estimate our answer to make sure that we are close to or have the exact answer here. So we're going to estimate both of the fractions from the problem to either 0, 1/2, or 1. And the pictures might help us do that. 1 out of 6 is closest to having none colored in. It's closer to that than it would be to having half colored in or all colored in. So 1 out of 6 we're going to estimate to 0. 2 out of 6 is closer to 1/2 being colored in than none at all. So 2, 6 we're going to estimate to 1/2. And if we add our two estimates together, 0 plus 1/2, we get 1/2. Now most of the time when you do an estimate, you're not going to get the exact same answer as the problem like we did here, but it should be close to or equal to it. So 1/6 plus 2/6 should be close to or equal to our estimate of 1/2, and it just so happens it's exactly 1/2. But again, that's not always going to happen. Okay? You should always estimate at the end of your problems to make sure that your answers make sense. So here is a little rundown of how you add two fractions with like denominators without all the representations and everything. So here you just add or subtract the numerators, so 1 plus 2 is 3. Denominator stays the same. And then you simplify your answer if you need to. Here in this example problem we did, so we simplified it to 1/2. And then it's always helpful to estimate at the end to check your answer. So take a minute, hit pause, do these two example problems. Shouldn't take you too long. And then you can unpause to see how you did. Okay, here are your answers. So 3/8 plus 1/8 is 4/8, and then you can simplify that to 1/2 by dividing both of those numbers by 4. Here, 8/11 minus 2/11 is just 8 minus 2 is 6, so 6/11. And 6/11 cannot be simplified. Now let's talk about what to do when you have unlike denominators. So here the example problem is 1/4 plus 3/6. What you need to do is find a common denominator. It's most beneficial if you can find the least common denominator, because that will prevent you from having to do a lot of simplifying at the end. But some teachers have taught doing a butterfly method to find a common denominator, or multiplying the two denominators together to find a common denominator. So whatever you've learned in the past you can use, as long as you end up with a common denominator and you adjust your numerators so that the fractions are still equal to their original fractions. Okay? So here, if you look at the picture, it's explaining why we need a common denominator. These blocks are different sizes, so that means you can't really compare them right now. We need to make them equal in size. So the way we do that is by finding a common denominator. So take a second and think about what would be a common denominator for 4 and 6. Well, you could do 4 times 6 to get 24, but there's actually a smaller number. If you did 4 times 3 and 6 times 2, both of those numbers are going to equal 12. So we're going to use 12 as our common denominator. Okay? So I'm going to adjust 1/4 by multiplying by 3 on both parts to change it into a fraction with a denominator of 12, and it's going to equal 3/12. Here, if I multiply 6 times 2, I get 12, and 3 times 2 is 6. So now you can see with the representations, we changed the two fractions into 12ths, and so I colored in 3 out of 12 here, and 6 out of 12 here. And if you look at the amount shaded in both of the pictures, it's exactly the same. 1/4 and 3/12 are equal. The pictures prove that. 3/6 and 6/12 are equal because the pictures prove it. So that means now we can combine the two yellow bars here because they have common denominators, and it's going to give us a fraction that's equal to what happens when you put them together. So here we have 3/12 plus 6/12. That's our new problem because we adjusted our fractions. And 3/12 plus 6/12 is 9/12. So you can see that 9 out of 12 are colored in. And then we're going to simplify our fraction at the end just like we're supposed to. So after solving, you simplify. You divide 9 and 12 both by 3. So the simplified fraction is 3/4. Okay? And what you see here by the representation is that 9/12 and 3/4 are equal. So that means that our math that we did was correct. Okay, so here's your rundown of how to do it without all the representations and visuals. So find an LCD, so least common denominator. So here it's 12. You could have used 24, like I said, if you wanted to, or even 48. You would have had to do a lot of simplifying at the end when you're done. But you change your fractions so that the denominators are equal. So here we changed 1/4 to 3/12, 3/6 to 6/12. Added them together and simplify to get the answer. Okay, so take a second, practice these two, try to find a common denominator, do your subtracting or adding, and then when you're finished, check your work after you unpause. Okay, here are the answers here. Here, 8 and 12 have a common denominator of 24. If you use 48 or 96, that would be okay. It's just that at the end, you would have some simplifying to do. Here, I used the least common denominator. So a lot of times when you use the least common denominator, you don't have to simplify. So 15 24ths, we multiplied each of these by 3. We multiply each of these by 2 to get 2 24ths. And then you do 15 plus 2 to get 17. 17 and 24 do not have a common factor other than 1, so it cannot be simplified. Here, you could have used 50, you could have used 20. Here I used the least common denominator of 10, and then I subtracted. So 9/10 actually stayed the same. I didn't have to change that fraction at all. If I multiply 2/5 by 2 and 2, I get 4/10. So 9 minus 4 is 5. 10 stays the same. And then 5/10 can be simplified into 1/2 by dividing each part of the fraction by 5. Okay? So there's your lesson on adding and subtracting fractions. You can rewatch your video if you need to. Use this to help with practice like always, and I'll see you next time.